Vivienne Marlowe's voice cut through the phone line like a scalpel through silk. $340 million for a company limping along at 11.2% growth when they'd promised 18. The spreadsheet didn't lie, and neither did she. Mr. Patterson, your valuation assumes performance you haven't delivered in 3 quarters. I'm offering $280 million. Final. She ended the call before he could counter. The merger would close by Friday, another trophy for the woman Forbes called the Ice Queen of Seattle. Vivienne set the phone down with surgical precision, removed the Louboutin heels that had carried her through 14 hours of conquest, and walked barefoot across Persian rugs worth more than most people's cars. Floor-to-ceiling windows transformed her corner office into a glass cage 43 stories above the city. Seattle glittered below like scattered diamonds on black velvet, beautiful and untouchable as everything else in her carefully constructed world. The view cost 7 figures in annual rent, worth every penny to feel this high above the mess of ordinary human existence. But tomorrow marked 5 years. 5 years since the sky opened up and swallowed the only things that mattered. Her reflection stared back from the darkened glass, a ghost in a charcoal suit hair escaping its severe bun makeup, smeared at the corners where she'd pressed too hard trying not to feel. 43 floors up, and she still couldn't get high enough to escape January 16th. The music started without conscious decision. Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor, the piece Nathaniel used to play on Sunday mornings while Hazel danced in her pajamas. Vivienne's phone sat on the conference table, the melody filling the empty office with ghosts. She moved into the center of the room, arms wrapping around her own shoulders, because there was no one else to hold. Dancing alone at midnight in the place where she spent more time than anywhere because home meant preserved bedrooms and photographs of people who would never age. Here, at least, the loneliness had a purpose. Here, she could pretend the emptiness was strategy rather than survival. The tears came silently. She'd learned to cry without sound years ago. 18 floors below. Garrett Sullivan sat in his decade-old Honda Civic in the mostly empty parking garage and stared at his phone. 10:47 p.m. Cooper would be asleep on Mrs. Brennan's couch by now. The 4th-floor neighbor who never asked why a 7-year-old spent so many evenings watching Korean dramas with a 68-year-old widow instead of his own father. The Jensen file sat on his passenger seat, 30 pages of acquisition analysis due at 8 tomorrow morning, because his manager Marcus didn't care that mornings started at 5:30, with a small boy who needed breakfast and shoelaces tied, and a 12-second hug that measured love in Mississippis, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, all the way to 12, because that's how long Claire used to hold Cooper before school. And if they kept counting, maybe she wasn't really gone. Maybe love could be quantified and preserved, like specimens in formaldehyde. Garrett grabbed the file and headed back into Marlowe Corporate Solutions, the building where he'd worked for 4 years in Cube 7B, without anyone remembering his name. The security desk was empty after 9. The elevator hummed its lonely ascent to the 7th-floor motion sensors, clicking off at 9:00 p.m. sharp because the company prided itself on sustainability and energy conservation and all the buzzwords that looked good in annual reports to shareholders who'd never walked through darkness to retrieve forgotten work. His cubicle waited exactly as he'd left it. Coffee mug with brown rings fossilized into ceramic. Photo frame facing outward, Cooper at 6 gap-toothed grin holding up a crayon drawing labeled Mama in Heaven, with purple wings that looked more like arms reaching down than anything divine. Garrett didn't look at it long. He'd learned not to look too long at reminders of before. The file slid into his messenger bag with the sound of paper against canvas ordinary and final. He was halfway back to the elevator when the music started. Piano. Classical. Drifting down from somewhere above him like smoke signals from a distant fire. The eighth floor executive territory where analysts like him didn't venture without appointments and excellent reasons. The music continued, not a tune he recognized, just notes strung together like pearls on a broken necklace. Garrett stood frozen between cubicle rows that looked like open graves in the shadows. Every logical neuron screamed to leave. Get in the elevator, go home, pick up Cooper from Mrs. Brennan's overstuffed couch, carry him to bed without waking him because the boy was finally sleeping through the night 18 months after the funeral, and that felt like progress worth protecting. But the music didn't stop, and Garrett had learned something in the past year and a half sometimes. Loneliness sounds like music in the dark, and sometimes you follow it because the alternative is going home to an empty apartment where your dead wife's pillow still sits untouched on her side of the bed. The emergency stairwell was always unlocked. Fire code. His footsteps echoed off concrete as he climbed, each step a betrayal of common sense. The eighth floor had a different quality to its darkness. Ceilings, higher offices, larger silence, heavier with the weight of decisions that affected thousands of lives. This was where careers ended and futures were bought and sold like commodities on the quarterly reports Garrett helped prepare. The music grew louder as he moved down the hallway, past the CFO's office with its mahogany furniture visible even in shadow, past general counsel with frosted glass doors. At the end of the corridor, double doors of walnut brass nameplate catching ambient light from the city beyond. Vivian Marlowe, Chief Executive Officer. The doors stood open 3 inches, enough to see movement inside, enough to know he should turn around, run, forget whatever private moment he was about to witness. But Garrett's feet carried him forward anyway. The office was cave dark except for city light pouring through windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. Silhouetted against that glow, a woman danced. Not the Vivian Marlowe from company meetings, the one who wore power suits like armor and spoke in sentences that left no room for argument. Not the CEO who'd been featured in Forbes and Fortune for taking Marlowe Corporate Solutions from near bankruptcy to national prominence in 5 years. This woman was barefoot, hair loose around her shoulders, catching light from the cityscape in ways that made her look less like a Fortune 500 executive and more like someone who'd wandered into the wrong life. She still wore the charcoal suit from today's board meeting, but the jacket hung open collar askew like she'd started undressing for home and forgotten halfway through. And she was crying, silent tears tracking down her face while she moved in slow circles. Arms wrapped around herself like she was dancing with a partner no one else could see. Garrett knew he should leave, knew that whatever private grief he was witnessing wasn't meant for employee eyes, especially not the eyes of a mid-level analyst who barely registered on her radar. But he couldn't move, couldn't look away from the raw vulnerability of a woman who controlled boardrooms and billion-dollar budgets, now reduced to something achingly human and alone. The music stopped. Vivian froze mid-turn, her gaze snapping to the doorway where Garrett stood like an idiot with a file folder and a phone flashlight, and absolutely no excuse for being there. 3 seconds. Neither moved. Then Vivian's face transformed. The grief vanished behind a mask Garrett recognized because he wore the same one every morning. Professional composure, emotional lockdown, the kind of control that takes practice and costs everything. Mr. Sullivan. Her voice was ice over deep water. Explain why you're on this floor at midnight. Garrett's throat felt lined with sandpaper. The file folder in his hands suddenly weighed 50 pounds. I forgot a file, heard something. Wanted to make sure everything was okay. Everything is fine. Vivian turned away, moving to her desk with quick, precise steps. She grabbed tissue from a box he hadn't noticed, wiping her face with movements that were almost violent in their efficiency. You should go home. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. You didn't see anything. It wasn't a question. Wasn't a request. It was the voice that negotiated mergers and dismantled competitors, the tone that made grown executives reconsider their life choices. Do you understand, Mr. Sullivan? Garrett should have agreed, should have backed out of the office, returned to the elevator, collected his sleeping son, and retreated to their tiny apartment and their tiny life, and pretended this moment never happened. Should have let Vivian Marlowe keep her secrets and her dignity and her carefully maintained distance from the ordinary human messiness of grief. But he heard himself say something else entirely. I understand wanting to be alone when you're not okay. Vivian's shoulders stiffened, hands frozen mid-reach for another tissue. My wife died. The words fell between them like stones into deep water. Garrett hadn't planned to say it, hadn't told anyone at work except HR, and then only because he'd needed bereavement leave and flex scheduling for single-parent emergencies. Most people at Marlowe Corporate Solutions thought Claire had left him. Easier to believe in divorce than tragedy. Easier to gossip about failed marriages than face the randomness of death. Vivienne turned slowly, and something had shifted in her eyes, the ice cracking just enough to reveal dark water beneath. When, 18 months ago, June 2024, car accident. Black ice on I-5. Semi-truck didn't brake in time. Garrett stopped, swallowed hard against the memory of the police officer at his door, the specific kind of knock that announces the end of worlds. She was coming home from her mother's house with groceries. Our son was supposed to be with her. I'd kept him home at the last minute because he had a cold. I'm sorry. Vivian's voice had lost its edge, not soft exactly, but no longer sharp enough to cut. I'm very sorry. Everyone at work thinks she walked out. I don't correct them. It's easier than explaining why I need to leave by 5:30, why I can't do the happy hours or the team-building weekends. Garrett met her gaze across the darkened office. Single dad sounds like a choice. Widower sounds like pity. Vivian finished quietly. Yeah. They stood in silence, two strangers connected by nothing except shared understanding of a pain most people couldn't fathom. The city glittered beyond the windows, indifferent to the small human tragedies playing out in its towers of steel and glass. Garrett should leave now, should exit with dignity intact and return to his life below the 8th floor where executives were distant figures who made decisions that trickled down like rain. But Vivian was still barefoot, still had tears drying on her face, still looked like someone who'd been caught in a private moment of absolute vulnerability and wasn't sure how to recover. Can I ask? Garrett hesitated. Why were you dancing? Vivian's jaw tightened. The mask started to reform ice crystallizing over water. That's not your concern. You're right. I'm sorry. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. 5 years ago today. Garrett looked back. Vivienne stood framed by the windows, the city lights behind her making her look small, despite the power she wielded, despite the corner office and the fortune profile and the reputation that preceded her into every room. 5 years ago today, my husband and daughter were killed in a plane crash. Small aircraft, pilot error, mechanical failure. The NTSB report had multiple contributing factors, but the result was the same. I lost them both. The air left Garrett's lungs. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. No one knows. Not here. Vivian's hands curled into fists at her sides, knuckles white even in the dim light. I took 2 weeks after it happened, then came back to work and rebuilt this company from near bankruptcy into what it is now. People think I'm focused, driven, ruthless. They don't know I'm just... She stopped, shook her head, but Garrett understood the words she couldn't say. Running, hiding, surviving by refusing to feel anything except the clean lines of spreadsheets and profit margins. I can't be at home tonight. Vivian's voice cracked slightly. Can't stand in that house with their pictures on the walls and their rooms preserved like museums and the silence that sounds like screaming. So I come here. and dance. My daughter loved to dance, Garrett said softly, then corrected himself, because the tense mattered because words had weight. Your daughter. You said Hazel. She was 6. Vivian's voice carried the careful control of someone who'd practiced saying dead names without breaking. She'd make me dance with her in the kitchen while dinner cooked. I'd tell her I was too busy, had calls to make, reports to finish. She'd grab my hands and say, Mama, busy is just scared of fun. So I'd dance with her. Nathaniel would join us, and for 5 minutes everything else would disappear. Garrett's chest ached with recognition. Cooper, my son, he does this thing where he hugs me for exactly 12 seconds every morning. He counts out loud. I asked him why 12, and he said it's because that's how long Mama used to hug him before school. They keep us tethered, or they keep us sane, Vivian whispered. Or insane. Some nights I'm not sure which. The music on her phone had looped back to the beginning, Chopin filling the office with melody that sounded like remembering. Garrett took a careful step into the office, crossing the threshold from hallway to inner sanctum, from appropriate distance to something dangerous and necessary. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. The being okay part, the moving forward part. Everyone says time heals, but time just makes you better at hiding. Yes. Vivian turned to face him fully, and in the city-lit darkness her eyes looked less like ice and more like deep water that might hold warmth if you could reach far enough down. People think strength is not breaking. They don't understand that sometimes strength is breaking in private and then reassembling yourself enough to function in public. Over and over. Every single day. Is that what you're doing? Reassembling? Trying. She gestured to the office around them, the mahogany desk, the leather chairs, the abstract art on walls that cost more than Garrett's annual salary. This is my workshop where I put the pieces back together before I face the world again. Garrett thought about his own reassembly process. The early morning routine with Cooper that kept him moving forward, breakfast backpack shoelaces, the 12-second hug that measured love in heartbeats. The spreadsheets and financial models that gave him problems with clear solutions. The bedtime stories he read with voices for each character because making Cooper laugh felt like winning a small battle against the darkness that wanted to consume them both. Can I tell you something? Garrett asked. Yes. When I heard you humming, I almost left. Almost convinced myself it wasn't my business, that whatever was happening up here had nothing to do with me. He paused, finding the words. But I didn't leave because loneliness sounds different when it's not your own. And I thought maybe if someone else was feeling what I feel, maybe I could do something I wish someone had done for me, which is just be there, even if I can't fix it, even if all I can do is stand in the darkness with you and confirm that yes, this is terrible, and no, you don't have to pretend it's not. Vivian's eyes glistened with new tears. She blinked them back quickly, but not before Garrett saw the mask crack wider, exposing the raw humanity beneath years of carefully constructed armor. I've spent 5 years making sure no one sees me like this. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I know. I've spent 18 months doing the same thing. What changed tonight? Garrett considered the question. What had changed? He'd climbed the stairs to the executive floor following the sound of grief, walked into Vivian Marlowe's private moment, and instead of running, he'd stayed. He'd spoken truth he usually kept locked away. He'd admitted weakness to a woman who could fire him with a signature. Maybe I'm tired of being alone with it, Garrett said finally. Maybe I'm tired of pretending the weight isn't crushing me. Maybe... He stopped, started again. Maybe I heard someone else breaking and realized I don't want to break alone anymore. Vivian nodded slowly, and something shifted in her posture. Not surrender exactly, but a lessening of the rigid control she'd maintained since first seeing him in the doorway. Not the CEO now. Just a woman who'd lost everything that mattered and was still trying to figure out how to exist in a world that kept spinning regardless. I don't do this. She looked down at her hands at fingers that could sign documents worth millions, but couldn't bring back the people who mattered. Let people see me like this. Let anyone close enough to witness the parts I hide. I know. Garrett's throat felt tight. Neither do I. This could be complicated. Vivian looked up at him, and in the dim light, her face held an expression he couldn't quite name, vulnerability mixed with something that might have been hope if hope didn't feel so dangerous. You work for me. There are policies, boundaries, professional considerations. I'm not asking for anything. Garrett interrupted gently because he needed her to understand this wasn't about attraction or romance or anything except two people recognizing each other in the darkness. I'm just saying if you need to dance, you don't have to do it alone. The words hung between them like an offering, an invitation to share the burden of grief with someone who understood its weight. Not love, not even friendship yet. Just two people acknowledging that surviving wasn't the same as living, and maybe they could find a way to do something more than just survive. Vivian looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable in the half-light. Then she moved to her desk, picked up her phone, and pressed a button. Soft music filled the office. Instrumental melancholy. The kind of melody that sounds like remembering every beautiful thing you've lost. She walked back to the center of the room, barefoot on carpet that probably cost more than Garrett's monthly rent, and extended her hand. Garrett stared at her hand like it was a grenade with the pin pulled. This was his CEO. This was crossing every professional line ever drawn. This was asking for complications he couldn't afford, risks he shouldn't take. You said I don't have to dance alone, Vivian said softly, hand still extended between them, like a bridge over dark water. So don't make me. Every logical part of Garrett's brain screamed warnings. This was Vivian Marlowe, Ice Queen of Seattle woman who controlled budgets worth more than small nations. This was his boss separated from him by 3 levels of management and an economic canyon so wide it might as well be the Grand Canyon. This was dangerous in ways he couldn't even articulate, risks that went beyond professional consequences into territory he wasn't ready to map. But Claire's voice echoed in his memory. Life's too short to play it safe, Garrett. Dance when someone asks. Love while you can. Don't wait for perfect moments, make them. He took Vivian's hand. They moved slowly, awkwardly at first. Neither of them were dancers. Just two broken people shuffling in circles to music that sounded like sorrow given melody. Vivian was shorter than Claire had been, her hand smaller in his, her grief a different texture, but the same impossible weight. I don't know what I'm doing, Garrett admitted, his voice rough with emotion he usually kept buried. Neither do I. Vivian's response came quiet and honest. I haven't danced with anyone since that night in the kitchen with Hazel and Nathaniel. Haven't wanted to. Haven't been able to. What changed tonight? Maybe the same thing that changed for you. She looked up at him, and in the darkness her eyes held depths he hadn't expected, pain he recognized, because he carried the same weight. Maybe I'm tired of being alone with it too. They swayed in silence, and Garrett felt the kind of connection he hadn't experienced since Claire died, the bone-deep recognition of another human being who understood pain without needing it, explained who knew that grief wasn't something you got over, but something you carried, and some days it was heavier than others. The music wrapped around them like a cocoon. Chopin's Nocturne, speaking the language of loss they both knew fluently. They were dancing with ghosts, both of them moving to rhythms set by loved ones who weren't there anymore, but whose absence shaped everything. The song ended. Another began. They kept moving. My board would lose their minds if they saw this, Vivian said, and there was almost a laugh in her voice, dark and unexpected. The CEO dancing with a mid-level analyst at midnight in her darkened office. My coworkers already think I'm weird, Garrett replied. This would just confirm it. You're not weird. Vivian's voice held a note of something that might have been warmth, if warmth didn't require too much energy. You're real. Everyone else performs their lives. You just exist in yours. I don't have energy for performance. The truth slipped out before Garrett could stop it. It all goes to Cooper. To making sure he has breakfast and clean clothes and someone who shows up even when showing up feels impossible. He's lucky to have you. He deserves better. Deserves a parent who isn't barely holding it together. He deserves someone who loves him enough to keep trying, Vivian interrupted, and her voice carried a fierceness that surprised him. Someone who shows up every day even when everything hurts. Someone who ties shoes and makes breakfast and reads bedtime stories while carrying grief that would break most people. He deserves you, Garrett, exactly as you are. Garrett's throat closed. No one had said that to him, not the therapist Cooper's school had recommended, not the grief counselor he'd seen twice before deciding talking about it, just made it worse. Not even Mrs. Brennan, who was kind, but kept her distance from the rawness of his loss. No one had looked at him and said, "You're enough. You're doing it right. Your broken is still worthy." Thank you. He managed to push the words past the tightness in his chest. I mean it. I mean it too. Vivian's hand tightened slightly in his, a small gesture that carried enormous weight. I see parents in this building who have everything. Resources, support partners, and they still outsource love to nannies and boarding schools and anyone willing to take responsibility. You're doing it alone, and you're doing it right. I don't feel like I'm doing it right. I feel like I'm drowning and trying to make sure Cooper doesn't notice. He notices. Vivian's voice went soft with understanding. Children always notice, but noticing pain isn't the same as being damaged by it. If you teach him nothing else, teach him that grief is proof of love, and love is always worth the risk. Is it? Garrett asked the question, escaping before he could stop it. Worth the risk? Because right now all I know is that loving people means losing them, and I'm not sure I'm strong enough to survive losing anyone else. I don't know yet, Vivian admitted, and the honesty in her voice was more comforting than any platitude could have been. Ask me again after tonight. After this. After choosing to be here instead of alone. They danced through 3 more songs, and with each one, the awkwardness faded into something easier. Not comfortable grief had made comfort impossible, but less painful. Shared weight was still weight, but it didn't crush quite as hard when you weren't carrying it alone. Finally, Vivian stepped back. She was crying again, but her face looked less haunted than it had when Garrett first saw her, silhouetted against the city lights. More human, more real. I should let you go home. Her voice carried exhaustion and something that might have been relief. Your son will wake up wondering where you are. He's used to me coming home late. Garrett hesitated, not wanting to break whatever spell had formed in the darkness between them. Will you be okay? I don't know. Vivian walked to her desk, movements slower now, less controlled. But I feel less alone than I did an hour ago. Me too. She picked up a business card from a holder embossed elegant, the kind of card that probably cost more per square inch than Garrett's shoes. Her personal card with a mobile number printed below her name in understated font. If you ever need to not be alone, Vivian said, holding it out to him, call. Garrett looked at the card like it might burn him. This was crossing lines, blurring boundaries, asking for complications neither of them could afford. Are you sure that's professional? No. Appropriate? Probably not. Necessary? Maybe. Vivian's smile was sad and small and honest. I just know that tonight you did something no one else has done in 5 years. You saw me break and didn't run away. That matters. Garrett carefully tucked the card into his wallet, sliding it behind his driver's license where it wouldn't get lost. Same offer stands for you. If you need someone to dance with someone who understands why you can't be home tonight. Thank you, Vivian said simply. And in those two words, Garrett heard everything she couldn't say. Gratitude and fear and desperate hope that maybe they'd found something worth holding on to in the darkness. He collected his forgotten file folder from where he'd set it on her conference table. They stood in awkward silence, two people who'd shared intimate grief but had no script for what came next. Good night, Vivian. Good night, Garrett. He walked out of her office down the hallway, past offices belonging to people who would never know what happened here tonight, down the emergency stairs that echoed with his footsteps through the darkened 7th floor to the elevator. His hand shook slightly as he pressed the button for the lobby. The car descended, and with each floor that passed, reality reasserted itself. He'd just danced with his CEO, shared personal tragedy, crossed every professional boundary that existed. This could ruin him, cost him the job Cooper depended on, destroy the fragile stability they'd built from the wreckage of Claire's death. But as Garrett stepped out into the cold Seattle night, keys in hand, breath fogging in January air, he realized something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in 18 months, he didn't feel completely alone. Someone else was carrying the same impossible weight. Someone else understood that survival wasn't the same as healing, that strength wasn't the absence of breaking, but the choice to keep assembling the pieces. His phone buzzed. Mrs. Brennan texting that Cooper was sleeping soundly. No rush. Garrett sat in his car in the empty parking garage and stared at the steering wheel, hands gripping leather worn smooth by 4 years of commuting. Tomorrow, this night would feel surreal. Tomorrow, he'd second-guess every word spoken, every moment shared. Tomorrow, Vivian Marlowe would return to being the untouchable CEO, and Garrett Sullivan would return to being Cubicle 7B, and whatever connection they'd formed in darkness would seem impossible in daylight. But tonight, he'd heard loneliness that wasn't his own and followed it. Tonight he'd stood in a corner office with a barefoot CEO and confirmed that, yes, grief is terrible. And no, she didn't have to pretend otherwise. Tonight he danced with someone who understood that the weight of loss doesn't diminish. You just get stronger from carrying it, or you learn to ask for help carrying it together. Garrett started his car and drove toward home, toward Cooper, sleeping on Mrs. Brennan's overstuffed couch, toward their tiny apartment and their tiny life and the morning routine that kept them both upright. But in his wallet, a business card with a phone number. In his chest, a feeling that might have been hope. And in his memory, a woman dancing alone in the dark, crying for her lost family, breaking in private the way Garrett broke every single day. He wasn't sure what came next, wasn't sure if connection was possible when grief had made him a ghost in his own life, wasn't sure if whatever had happened tonight was the beginning of something, or just a strange shared moment that would fade with dawn. But for the first time since Claire died, Garrett felt like maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to carry everything alone. That would have to be enough for now. The morning after arrived with Cooper launching himself onto Garrett's bed at 6 a.m., all 7-year-old enthusiasm and zero regard for the concept of Saturday sleep-ins. Dad pancakes, and do astronauts eat breakfast in space, or do they just float around hungry? Garrett's eyes cracked open to find his son's face inches from his own gap-toothed grin, blazing with the kind of joy that felt like both salvation and accusation. How could Cooper be this happy when half their family was gone? How did children metabolize loss into something that looked like resilience instead of just carrying the weight until it crushed them? Probably freeze-dried pancakes, buddy. Garrett pulled Cooper into a hug, breathing in the sleep-warm smell of his son's hair. Come here. Cooper counted dutifully, voice muffled against Garrett's shoulder. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3. Mississippi. At 12, Cooper squirmed free with practiced efficiency. The ritual never varied exactly 12 seconds, no more, no less, because that's how long Claire used to hold him. And if they kept the count perfect, maybe the love wouldn't fade. Maybe memory could be preserved in repetition. Can we have chocolate chips since we're not in space and don't have to eat freeze-dried food that tastes like cardboard, probably? Sure, buddy. Garrett moved through the morning routine on autopilot, mixing batter, heating the griddle, packing Cooper's lunch while his son colored at the kitchen table. But his mind kept circling back to Vivian Marlowe, barefoot in her office, tears on her face, hand extended, like an invitation to share something bigger than either of them could carry alone. The business card was still in his wallet. He'd checked twice before falling asleep, and once upon waking, as if it might have vanished like evidence of a dream. Dad. Cooper looked up from his drawing a rocket ship with what appeared to be a dog driving it. You okay? You keep staring at nothing. Garrett forced a smile that felt like lifting weights. Just thinking about work stuff. Boring. Cooper returned to his masterpiece, adding flames to the rocket with orange crayon. Mrs. Brennan says thinking too much makes you old. She says you should dance more. The spatula nearly slipped from Garrett's hand. Chocolate chips scattered across the griddle like shrapnel. She said what? Dance more. She does Tai Chi every morning and says moving keeps your brain young. She's really old, but she can touch her toes. Can you touch your toes? Yeah, I can touch my toes. Prove it. So Garrett bent down and touched his toes while Cooper clapped and declared him not completely ancient yet, and they ate chocolate chip pancakes, and Garrett helped his son into the backpack that seemed to get heavier every week. They walked 3 blocks to the bus stop, past houses where other families were probably eating breakfast together, complete units without missing pieces. Love you, Dad. Cooper's voice carried the casual certainty of a child who hadn't yet learned that love doesn't protect anyone from loss. Love you too, buddy. The bus pulled away with Cooper's face pressed against the window, waving until he was out of sight. Garrett stood on the corner, feeling the familiar emptiness that always followed his son's departure. The apartment would be silent now until 3:30, the hours between drop-off and pickup stretching like a desert he had to cross alone. His phone buzzed. Unknown number, but the message told him everything he needed to know. Thank you for last night. I didn't realize how much I needed it until it happened. VM. Garrett stared at the text for a full minute before typing back, Me too. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Can we talk? Not at work. Somewhere else, when your schedule allows. The responsible answer was no. The safe answer was to let last night remain what it was, a strange, necessary moment between 2 grieving people that shouldn't be repeated or examined too closely. But Garrett's thumbs moved across the screen with their own momentum. Lunch Monday. There's a cafe 2 blocks south of the office. Mercer Street, 12:30. I'll be there. Saturday morning dissolved into the usual routine grocery shopping, with a list Claire used to make that Garrett still followed like scripture laundry that never seemed to end, meal prep for the week that consisted of variations on the same 5 recipes he could execute without burning down the apartment. Normal chaos, normal noise, the kind of normal that kept him from thinking too hard about dancing with his CEO at midnight. But Cooper asked the question over dinner Sunday night, fork pushing spaghetti around his plate with the concentration of a child building towards something difficult. Dad, why don't you ever invite anyone to my games? Garrett looked up from his own barely touched plate. Invite who, buddy? I don't know. You never bring anyone. Jimmy's dad brings his girlfriend. Sarah's mom brings her book club. You just bring coffee and look sad. The accusation landed like a physical blow. Garrett set his fork down carefully, buying time. I don't look sad. Dad. Cooper gave him the look. The one that said, "Children see everything adults try to hide, and lying about it just insults their intelligence. You look sad all the time except when you're helping me with homework or when we're doing voices for stories. Then you look okay." "I'm okay, buddy." "You're okay-ish," Cooper corrected with the precision of someone who'd learned to measure truth in gradients. "Mrs. Brennan says okay isn't the same as really okay. She says you need friends." "I have friends." "Name one." Garrett opened his mouth, closed it. He had co-workers whose names he sometimes forgot. Acquaintances he nodded to in the hallway. People he exchanged pleasantries with in the elevator. But friends. People he talked to about things that mattered. People who knew him beyond surface-level small talk. That's what I thought. Cooper returned to his spaghetti with the satisfaction of a prosecutor who'd just proven his case. "You need friends, Dad. Grown-up friends who aren't me." "When did you get so smart?" "I was always smart. You just don't listen when you're in your head too much." Cooper added more Parmesan with the confidence of a child who knew cheese made everything better. "So can you invite someone tomorrow? Make it less sad." "Maybe." Garrett chose his words carefully, aware he was about to open a door he couldn't easily close. "There's someone I could invite, but she's just a friend." "Okay. Nothing else. Does she like soccer?" "I don't know." "Does she like dinosaurs?" "I don't know that either." "What do you know about her?" Garrett thought about Vivian crying in her office barefoot and broken dancing with ghosts only she could see. Thought about the way she'd looked at him across the conference table Friday morning, professional and distant before texting him later with vulnerability hidden behind careful words. Thought about a woman who'd lost her husband and daughter 5 years ago and was still trying to figure out how to exist in a world that kept spinning regardless of personal catastrophe. "I know she understands what it's like to lose someone." Garrett's voice went quiet with truth he usually kept buried. "I know she's trying to figure out how to keep going, even when everything hurts." Cooper looked up from his drawing. The dinosaur now had a basketball because why not? "Like us?" "Yeah, buddy, like us." "Then she should definitely come tomorrow." Cooper added a hoop to the dinosaur's court with green crayon. "We're good at keeping going even when things hurt. Maybe we can teach her." Garrett's throat closed around words he couldn't articulate. His 7-year-old son, who'd lost his mother and learned to count love in Mississippi seconds, thought he could teach someone else how to survive. The resilience of children was either beautiful or heartbreaking, and Garrett still hadn't decided which. That night after Cooper fell asleep mid-story, something about black holes and event horizons, Garrett stood in the doorway watching his son breathe. The nightlight cast soft shadows across space posters and bookshelves, overflowing with stories they'd read together. The photo frame on the nightstand showed 3 smiling faces: Garrett, Cooper, and Claire. Before. He pulled out his phone and texted Vivian before he could second-guess himself. "My son asked if I could invite someone to his game tomorrow. Wants to make it less sad. You still want to come?" Her response came quickly. "Is he okay with a stranger being there? He's 7. Everyone's a potential friend until proven otherwise." "Then yes. What should I bring?" "Just yourself. Maybe coffee if the concession stand is closed. It's kids' soccer, not a board meeting." "I don't know how to do kids' soccer." "And neither do I. We'll figure it out together." There was a longer pause before her next message appeared. "Thank you for this, for letting me try." "Thank you for showing up." Garrett put his phone away and returned to Cooper's doorway. His son shifted in sleep arm, reaching out for the stuffed astronaut Claire had given him for his 5th birthday. The gesture was unconscious automatic muscle memory of comfort that transcended waking consciousness. "We're trying something new, buddy," Garrett whispered to his sleeping son. "Not sure if it'll help or make everything worse, but we're trying." Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and Cooper's boundless excitement about the game and the possibility of someone new watching him play. They drove to the Beacon Hill recreation fields where kids in oversized jerseys chased soccer balls with more enthusiasm than skill every weekend. "Is your friend coming?" Cooper asked for the fifth time in 20 minutes. She said she would. "Why, what's her name again?" "Vivian." "That's fancy." "Is she fancy?" Garrett thought about Vivian in her corner office with city views and crystal decanters, then thought about her barefoot and crying, stripped of every defense. "She's complicated." Complicated fancy or complicated normal? Both, maybe. Cooper pulled on his cleats with determination. "That doesn't make sense, Dad." "I know." They walked to the field where other families were already gathering, parents with travel mugs and folding chairs, siblings complaining about having to watch boring soccer grandparents with cameras ready to document every moment. Complete family units that made Garrett's chest ache with envy and grief in equal measure. He found his usual spot on the bleacher's third row left side, close enough to see but far enough to avoid the competitive parents who screamed instructions at 7-year-olds like they were coaching the World Cup. His coffee sat untouched in his hand, more prop than beverage. 8:45. 15 minutes until game time. Vivian said she'd be here, but maybe she'd changed her mind. Maybe the reality of attending a children's soccer game with an employee seemed too strange in daylight. Maybe, "Is this seat taken?" Garrett looked up and almost didn't recognize her. Vivian Marlowe wore jeans and a simple sweater, hair pulled back in a casual ponytail, sunglasses hiding her eyes. No makeup he could detect, no power suit, no visible armor. She looked like any other parent showing up to watch kids chase a ball around a field. "No." Garrett managed, throat suddenly dry. "It's free." She sat beside him, not too close, but near enough that he caught the scent of her perfume. Something subtle and expensive that probably had a French name he couldn't pronounce. Near enough to feel the warmth of another human body, solid and real in the cool morning air. "I wasn't sure what to wear." Vivian's voice carried uncertainty he'd never heard in the office. "I haven't been to a children's sporting event since 5 years." Garrett finished quietly. "Yes." They sat in silence as the field filled with tiny humans in oversized jerseys. Cooper was number 7, easy to spot by the way he waved at Garrett every 30 seconds, with the enthusiasm of someone discovering his father anew each time. "Which one is yours?" Vivian asked. "Number 7, the one who can't stop waving." "He looks happy." "He is mostly." Garrett waved back, and Cooper's grin threatened to split his face. "He has his moments bedtime when he asks if Mama can see him from heaven, mornings when he counts the seconds in our hugs. But yeah, mostly he's happy." "Kids are resilient like that." Vivian's hands tightened around her own coffee cup knuckles, white against the cardboard. Hazel was like that. Always smiling, always moving. She could find joy in everything. Puddles, cardboard bogs, the sound of rain on windows. She paused, breath catching. "I envied that. The ability to be happy without trying." The whistle blew and chaos erupted on the field. Kids chasing the ball in a swarm, colliding with each other, occasionally remembering they were supposed to be playing soccer. Cooper got control briefly before another kid stole it, and he laughed like it was the best thing that had ever happened. "He's terrible," Garrett said with more affection than criticism. "They're all terrible." Vivian's voice held something that might have been warmth. "It's beautiful." They watched in comfortable silence, and Garrett felt something ease in his chest that had been tight for 18 months. This was normal. This was life happening without grief crushing every moment. This was two people sitting in sunshine watching children play, and for a few minutes, that was enough. Halftime came with Cooper sprinting to the bleachers, breathless and grinning. "Dad, did you see my pass? Did you see it?" "I saw it, buddy. Great job." Cooper turned to Vivian with the fearlessness only 7-year-olds possess. "Are you my dad's friend?" "I am. I'm Vivian." "I'm Cooper. Did you like my pass?" "It was very impressive." It was mostly luck, but Coach says sometimes luck counts. Cooper bounced on his toes, energy radiating from every pore. Dad says you're learning how to keep going when things hurt. Do you want some goldfish crackers? Goldfish help everything. Vivian's composure cracked like ice under pressure. Garrett saw tears behind her sunglasses before she turned away, one hand coming up to cover her mouth. That's very kind, Cooper. Garrett's voice stayed steady, even though his own throat had tightened. But you should keep them. You'll need energy for the second half. Cooper looked between them with the uncanny perception of children who notice everything adults think they're hiding. Then he pulled the small bag of crackers from his pocket anyway and pressed them into Vivian's hand with ceremony. You can have them. Dad says being brave means trying even when you're scared. And sharing goldfish is like giving someone a little bit of brave they can eat. Vivian accepted the bag like it was made of glass, like it contained something infinitely more valuable than 99-cent snacks from the grocery store. Thank you, Cooper. Thank you. You're welcome. Are you coming to the park after everyone goes to the park after games? Garrett started to say no to explain that Vivian probably had things to do. Meetings to attend a life that didn't include hanging around playgrounds with other people's children. But she spoke first. I'd like that. If it's okay with your dad. Cooper looked at Garrett with hope blazing in his eyes, and Garrett found himself nodding because his son was smiling and Vivian looked less haunted than she had in her office, and maybe Mrs. Brennan was right. Maybe they both needed this. The second half of the game passed in a blur of near misses and accidental goals. Cooper's team lost, but nobody seemed to care. The kids swarmed their parents begging for snacks and validation high on exercise and sunshine and the simple joy of running around with friends. They walked to the adjacent playground where children created elaborate imaginary worlds from monkey bars and slides. Cooper ran off with his teammates while Garrett and Vivian sat on a bench watching kids build kingdoms from wood chips and determination. Thank you. Vivian's voice was quiet enough that Garrett had to lean closer to hear. For this. For letting me be part of something normal. Thank you for showing up. They sat in sunshine while children played and the world kept spinning, and for one Saturday morning, the weight both carried felt just a little bit lighter. Not healing, Garrett understood that healing was a luxury neither of them could afford yet, but something. Connection, maybe. Recognition. Two people learning to exist in proximity to life again, instead of just surviving at its margins. Cooper successfully completed the monkey bars without falling, and Vivian cheered like he'd won Olympic gold, and Garrett felt tears prick his eyes, because this ordinary Saturday morning with soccer and playgrounds and someone choosing to show up, this was what fighting for looked like. Monday lunch at Mercer Street Cafe arrived with Garrett's stomach doing complicated gymnastics. The cafe was small and quiet, the kind of place that catered to professionals who wanted privacy with their sandwiches. High-backed booths and soft music that absorbed conversation. He arrived first, sliding into a corner booth at 12:25. Ordered coffee he didn't want just to have something to do with his hands. Vivian appeared at 12:32. She'd removed her suit jacket, traded reading glasses for contacts, let her hair down slightly so it looked less severe. Still professional, but softer, more like the woman he'd seen Saturday morning than the CEO who commanded boardrooms. Sorry I'm late. The Hendricks call ran long. It's fine. She slid into the booth across from him, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Two people who'd shared something intimate and terrifying and weren't sure how to proceed in daylight. I owe you an apology. Vivian's voice was controlled, but Garrett heard the tremor underneath. For Friday night. For putting you in an impossible situation. For crossing professional boundaries. For using you as a confessional without considering the consequences. You didn't use me. I chose to stay. Why did you stay? Garrett wrapped his hands around his coffee mug, absorbing warmth he didn't feel. Because I recognized what I was hearing. Because I've spent 18 months pretending I'm fine, and hearing someone else not be fine made me feel less alone. That's what I wanted to talk about. Vivian folded her hands on the table with the precision of someone marshalling arguments. This morning in the meeting, I had to treat you like any other employee. Had to maintain distance. Had to pretend Friday night didn't happen. And it felt... She started again with visible effort. Wrong. It felt wrong pretending we hadn't shared something real. But we have to pretend. Garrett kept his voice level even though his heart was hammering. You're the CEO, I'm nobody. If people found out what? That I cried in front of you, that we danced, that two grieving people found common ground. Vivian's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger or fear, or both. There's nothing inappropriate about what happened Friday night. Except the power dynamic. Except the potential for people to assume the worst. Except the fact that you could fire me with a signature and I'd have no recourse. I would never... I know that. Garrett interrupted gently. But other people don't. Look, I'm grateful for Friday night, grateful for Saturday morning, but I can't afford complications. I have a son depending on me, a job I need to keep, and a life that's barely holding together as it is. Whatever this is, it can't become something that jeopardizes that. Vivian was quiet for a long moment, hands still folded on the table like she was praying or preparing to deliver a verdict. What if I want it to become something... Garrett's heart lurched sideways. What? Not romance. Not a relationship. Vivian struggled for words, and watching the Ice Queen of Seattle search for language felt like witnessing something forbidden. Just connection. Someone who understands what it's like to keep functioning while falling apart. Someone I don't have to perform for. She looked down at her hands, and Garrett saw the vulnerability cost her something. I haven't had that in 5 years. Didn't realize how much I needed it until Friday night, until Saturday morning watching Cooper play and feeling like maybe I could exist in the world again instead of just occupying space in it. I don't know how that works, Garrett admitted. How we be whatever this is without it becoming a problem. Carefully, privately, with clear boundaries. Vivian met his eyes, and hers held a determination he recognized from board meetings. I'm not asking for anything inappropriate. I'm asking for friendship with someone who gets it. Someone who won't judge me for breaking down on hard anniversaries or needing to dance in my office because home is unbearable. Someone who understands that some days survival is the only victory that matters. And what do I get in return? The same. Vivian's voice softened into something honest and raw. Someone you can talk to when the weight gets too heavy. Someone who won't think less of you for admitting you're drowning. Someone who won't make you explain why you're not okay, because they already know. Garrett thought about his tiny apartment and his silent evenings after Cooper went to bed. Thought about the therapist he'd stopped seeing because talking about Claire just made her absence more real. Thought about Mrs. Brennan's kindness that never quite crossed into understanding because she hadn't lost what he'd lost, not the same way. This is a terrible idea, he said finally. Probably. People will talk if they find out. They won't find out. You can't promise that. No, Vivian agreed. But I can promise I'll be careful. That I'll protect your job, your reputation, Cooper's stability. That whatever this becomes, it won't hurt you. Garrett looked at the woman across from him. Brilliant, powerful, broken in ways only he could see. She wasn't asking for romance or promises or anything except someone to stand in the darkness with her. And God help him, he understood that need because he felt it too. Okay, he heard himself say. We can try this, whatever this is. But the second it becomes a problem, we stop. Clean break, no questions asked. Vivian finished. And at work, nothing changes. You're still Mr. Sullivan. I'm still Ms. Marlowe. Professional distance at all times. Except when we're not at work. Except then. They ordered lunch neither of them wanted and talked about logistics that felt both necessary and absurd. When could they meet? How could they communicate without raising suspicions? What boundaries needed to exist to keep this from destroying everything? The answer they discovered was Saturday mornings. Cooper had soccer from 9 to 11, then usually played at the park with teammates until early afternoon. Those were Garrett's only free hours in a week, structured around single parenthood and job obligations. "I can do Saturday mornings," Vivian said. "I'll come to the games. We can get coffee after while Cooper plays. Talk without anyone from work seeing." "What about your weekends? Don't you have—" Garrett stopped, unsure how to ask if the CEO of a major corporation had a life beyond board meetings and acquisition calls. "I have an empty house and preserved bedrooms and silence that sounds like screaming." Vivian's voice carried the weight of 5 years' accumulated loneliness. "I'll take soccer games and playground benches over that any day." They finished lunch and walked back to the office separately, Vivian leaving first to avoid being seen together. Garrett waited 5 minutes before following, and the gap between them felt like both protection and loss. That afternoon, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number that he immediately saved under VM. "Thank you for taking a chance on this. On me. I know it's complicated and risky and probably unwise, but I haven't felt this hopeful in 5 years." Garrett typed back carefully. "Me neither. See you Saturday." The rest of the week passed in a strange double consciousness. At work, Vivian was the untouchable CEO who commanded boardrooms with surgical precision. She passed Garrett in hallways without acknowledgement, maintained perfect professional distance in meetings, gave no indication that anything existed between them beyond employer and employee. But at night, after Cooper was asleep, texts would arrive. Never anything inappropriate or overly personal, just small observations about the day, questions about Cooper, admissions of difficulty that cost them both something to type. "Board meeting was brutal today. Sometimes I think they'd be happier if I just stayed frozen in grief forever. Easier to manage that way. Cooper asked tonight if being happy means forgetting Mom. I told him no. Not sure I believe it. Found myself in Hazel's room today. First time in months I could breathe in there without feeling like I was suffocating. Made pancakes this morning. Only burned 3. Progress. Small things. Ordinary things. The kind of mundane sharing that built scaffolding between two people learning to trust each other with their fractures. Friday afternoon brought trouble in the form of Preston Gallagher. Garrett was at his desk reviewing quarterly projections when the office erupted in whispers. He looked up to see a man in an expensive suit striding through the 7th floor like he owned it, heading directly for the elevator that would take him to executive territory. Tall, silver-haired, commanding presence. The kind of man who expected doors to open and people to move aside. And they did. "Who's that?" Garrett asked Jennifer from HR, who'd appeared at his cubicle looking concerned. Preston Gallagher, board member, 15% shareholder, was Nathaniel Marlowe's best friend before the crash. Jennifer lowered her voice. "Rumor is he bought into the company after they died to protect Vivian. Except lately he's been questioning her decisions. People are saying he came back to set things right." Garrett watched the elevator doors close behind Gallagher, and something cold settled in his stomach. History. The word carried weight. Implications. Complications he didn't want to examine. His phone buzzed. "Vivian. Don't come to the 8th floor today. Situation developing." "Are you okay?" "Will be, just stay clear." But Garrett couldn't focus on spreadsheets while knowing something was wrong. He made it until 2:30 before his worry overrode his common sense. He took the stairs to the 8th floor, staying in the stairwell with the door cracked just enough to hear voices drifting from Vivian's office. "You're destroying everything we built." Preston's voice carried accusation thick enough to taste. 5 years, Vivian. 5 years I've watched you hide behind work. And now you're playing house with some analyst, dishonoring Nathaniel and Hazel's memory for what? You have no right. Vivian's voice was steel wrapped in ice. I have every right. Nathaniel was my best friend. I watched you fall apart after they died. I held your hand through the funeral, helped you rebuild this company when you could barely function. And this is how you repay that loyalty, by parading around with some nobody while their pictures still hang in your home. Get out of my office. Not until you explain what you think you're doing. Nathaniel wouldn't want this. Hazel wouldn't want this. You're betraying their memory by... Don't you dare. Vivian's voice cracked like a whip. Don't you dare tell me what my dead husband and daughter would want. You don't get to use their memory as a weapon against me. Someone needs to remind you of who you were before you lost yourself in whatever this is. People are talking, Vivian. Board members asking questions about your judgment. Investors wondering if you're stable enough to lead. And you're giving them ammunition by associating with some mid-level analyst with a dead wife and a kid. Stop talking. Stop talking right now before I have security remove you from this building. I'm trying to help you. You're trying to control me. Vivian's voice had gone quiet, dangerous in its restraint. Trying to keep me frozen in grief because it's easier for you if I stay the broken widow you can manage. Well, I'm done being managed, Preston. I'm done letting guilt and obligation dictate how I live my life. And I'm done with this conversation. Garrett heard footsteps, the sound of a door slamming. He slipped back down the stairs before anyone could see him, heart pounding against his ribs. This was exactly what he'd feared: the complications, the scrutiny, the way their connection could be twisted into something ugly by people who didn't understand. By people who thought grief had expiration dates and approved methods of recovery. He made it back to his desk and tried to work, but the numbers swam before his eyes. His phone buzzed. I'm sorry you heard that. Garrett froze. She knew he'd been there. How did you know? I saw your reflection in the window. You're terrible at hiding. A pause then. Can we talk not here? Tonight after Cooper's asleep. I can come to you. Garrett thought about his tiny apartment with its photos of Claire and its evidence of a life barely held together. Thought about Vivian, seeing where he lived, how he lived, the smallness of his existence compared to her world of corner offices and power suits. But he typed, "Okay, I'll text you the address." The rest of the day dragged. Garrett picked up Cooper from school, made dinner, helped with homework, read the spacebook until his son's eyes drooped closed. Then he tidied the apartment in a panic, clearing dishes, hiding laundry, making sure nothing looked too pathetic. At 9:30, his phone buzzed. I'm outside. Garrett opened the door to find Vivian standing in the hallway of his building, looking completely out of place. She'd changed from her work suit into dark jeans and a sweater. But even casual clothes couldn't hide the fact that she didn't belong in this neighborhood of cramped apartments and peeling paint. Come in. She stepped inside, and Garrett watched her take in his home. The small living room with its worn couch. The kitchenette barely big enough for 2 people. The hallway leading to 2 tiny bedrooms. Photos everywhere, Claire smiling, Cooper growing a family that used to be whole. I'm sorry, Vivian said immediately. About Preston. About everything he said. You don't need to apologize for him. I do, though. He had no right to mention you, to weaponize your grief against me. He had no right to... She stopped, pressed her palms against her eyes. God, I'm so angry I can barely think straight. Garrett gestured to the couch. Sit. I'll make tea. She sat and Garrett busied himself in the kitchen making tea he didn't particularly want, needing something to do with his hands. When he returned with 2 mugs, Vivian was staring at a photo on the side table, Cooper as a baby. Claire holding him, both of them laughing at something beyond the frame. "She was beautiful," Vivian said softly. "Yes." Garrett handed her the tea. "Her name was Claire. We met in college, got married too young, had Cooper maybe before we were ready. But we made it work. We were happy." He sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. "The last thing she said to me was that she was picking up groceries and would be home in an hour. An hour. That's all the warning I got that my entire life was about to end." "Nathaniel texted me from the plane." Vivian's voice was barely audible. "Said Hazel was excited about flying, that she wanted to be a pilot when she grew up. That was the last message. 20 minutes later, air traffic control lost contact." She set her mug down with shaking hands. "I didn't know they were dead for 3 hours. 3 hours of thinking they were just delayed, maybe dealing with mechanical issues, nothing serious. And then the Coast Guard called." They sat in silence, two people holding the weight of memories too heavy to carry alone. Garrett's small apartment felt even smaller with the enormity of their shared loss filling every corner. "Preston thinks I'm betraying their memory by spending time with you," Vivian said finally. "He thinks grief has an expiration date, that after 5 years I should be done mourning and ready to move on, but only in ways he approves of, only with people he deems appropriate. And I'm not appropriate. You're not what he expected. You're not from my social circle. Not someone who can benefit my career or the company." Vivian turned to look at him. "You're just real. And that terrifies him because real means I might actually heal instead of staying frozen in the version of me he can control." Garrett thought about Preston's words echoing in the stairwell, the contempt in his voice when he'd mentioned some analyst with a dead wife and a kid. Thought about how his grief was being used as ammunition against Vivian, how their connection was being twisted into something shameful. "Maybe he's right," Garrett said quietly. "Maybe this is a bad idea. Maybe I should back off before it gets worse. Is that what you want?" "No. But what I want doesn't matter if it's hurting you." Vivian reached out and grabbed his hand, her grip surprisingly strong for someone who looked so fragile. "Listen to me. Preston doesn't get to decide how I grieve. He doesn't get to gatekeep my healing or dictate who I spend time with. He doesn't own my dead family's memory." Her voice shook with fury. "And he sure as hell doesn't get to shame you for surviving your own tragedy. He can make your life difficult. The board, the investors, let him try. I've been running this company for 5 years. I've tripled revenue, expanded into 6 new markets, maintained profit margins through 2 recessions. My performance speaks for itself." She squeezed his hand. "And if they want to fire me because I dare to have a personal life, because I dare to be human instead of a corporate robot, then I'll find another company to run." "You'd risk your career for this?" "For Saturday mornings at a kid's soccer game, I'd risk my career for the chance to feel alive again." Vivian's eyes were fierce with determination he recognized from board meetings. "And yes, that includes Saturday mornings watching Cooper play. It includes coffee and conversations and someone who doesn't expect me to be perfect. It includes having a friend who understands that some days just surviving is victory enough." Garrett wanted to believe her, wanted to think they could navigate this minefield without casualties, but he'd learned the hard way that wanting something didn't make it possible. "What happens when the board starts asking questions?" he asked. "When investors wonder about your judgment, when people start assuming the worst about why the CEO is spending time with a mid-level analyst, then I tell them the truth, that you're my friend, that we have shared experiences that created a connection, that there's nothing inappropriate about 2 grieving people supporting each other." Vivian's jaw set stubbornly. "And if they don't like it, they can take their concerns and shove them somewhere anatomically uncomfortable." Despite everything, Garrett almost smiled. "That's very professional. I'm off the clock. Professional went out the window the moment Preston started weaponizing dead children. They sat together on the worn couch, still holding hands, and Garrett felt the world shift slightly on its axis. This wasn't just about Saturday mornings anymore. This was about choosing to be visible, to be vulnerable, to risk everything, for the possibility that connection might be worth the cost. Cooper asked if you're going to keep coming to his games, Garrett said quietly. What did you tell him that I'd ask you? I want to keep coming. Vivian's voice was steady now, decision made. If that's still okay, if I haven't made everything too complicated. Garrett thought about his son's smile when Vivian showed up, the way Cooper shared his goldfish crackers like they were precious treasure, the 7-year-old wisdom about being sad. Meaning, you remember people right. Thought about how Vivian made him feel less alone, how Saturday mornings had become something worth waking up for. It's okay, he said. It's more than okay. Thank you for not running away, for not deciding I'm too much trouble. You're definitely trouble. Garrett allowed himself a small smile. But maybe I'm tired of playing it safe. That makes two of us. They talked until nearly midnight, sharing stories about Nathaniel and Claire and Hazel, about the small moments that make up a life and the crushing absence left behind. Garrett learned that Vivian sang off-key in the shower, that Hazel had been obsessed with butterflies, that Nathaniel had proposed in a botanical garden surrounded by flowers whose names he'd memorized just to impress her. Vivian learned that Claire had been terrible at cooking, but insisted on trying new recipes every week, that Garrett had fallen in love with her. Laugh before anything else that Cooper had inherited, his mother's stubborn optimism and her ability to find joy in small things. And slowly, carefully, they built something that existed beyond grief. A foundation of understanding that wasn't about replacing what they'd lost, but about creating space for new connection alongside old love. When Vivian finally left, Garrett stood in his doorway and watched her walk down the hallway. Mrs. Brennan's door opened, and the elderly woman gave him a knowing look. That one is good for you, Mrs. Brennan said in her Irish-accented English. Good energy. Sad like you, but fighting. That's good. She's just a friend, Mrs. Brennan. Friend is good start. Better than being alone all the time. She patted his arm. Claire would want you to have friends, would want Cooper to see his father living, not just surviving. Garrett's throat closed. How do you know what Claire would want? Because I'm old and have lived long enough to know that dead people don't want the living to stop living. They want us to remember them while we keep going. Otherwise, what's the point of love? Mrs. Brennan smiled sadly. Your friend Vivian, she knows this too. I see it in her face. She's learning to live again. You should learn together. She disappeared back into her apartment before Garrett could respond, leaving him standing in the hallway thinking about living versus surviving, and whether he'd been confusing the two for 18 months. The next morning, Garrett woke to texts from Vivian that arrived like grenades wrapped in politeness. Preston went to the board. They want a meeting. When? Today. 2 p.m. They're calling it a performance review, but we both know what it really is. What are you going to do? Fight. I've been preparing all night. Have every quarterly report, every profit margin, every successful project documented. If they want to question my judgment, they'll have to explain why my judgment has been profitable for 5 years. Do you need anything from me? Just keep being you. Keep showing up on Saturdays. Keep reminding me that choosing to live isn't betraying the dead. A pause then. And maybe say a prayer or whatever you do when you hope things turn out okay. Garrett didn't pray anymore. Stopped after Claire died, and his pleas for divine intervention went unanswered after he realized the universe didn't take requests from grieving fathers who just wanted their wives back. But he sent whatever positive energy he could muster into the void and hoped it was enough. At work, the tension was palpable. Everyone knew about the board meeting, knew Preston Gallagher had raised concerns, knew something significant was happening on the 8th floor. Ryan kept his head down and tried to focus on financial models, but his mind kept circling back to Vivian alone in that conference room, defending her right to have a personal life. At 2:15, his phone buzzed with a message from Jennifer. 3 board members just resigned. Preston Gallagher was escorted from the building by security. Garrett stared at his screen, not quite believing what he was reading. Resigned, escorted, out. What the hell had happened in that room? His phone rang. Vivienne's name on the screen. My office. Now. He took the stairs 2 at a time, no longer caring about professional boundaries or who might see him. The 8th floor felt different now, charged with electricity humming with the aftermath of something seismic. Vivian's office door stood open, and she was there by the windows, still in the navy suit she'd worn to battle, looking simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. What happened? I gave them an ultimatum. Vivian turned to face him, and her eyes held a light he hadn't seen before, fierce and uncompromising. Accept that I have a personal life that doesn't require their approval, or I walk and take my track record and industry contacts to a competitor who won't try to control my grief. Garrett felt his jaw go slack. You threatened to leave. I didn't threaten. I stated facts. Vivian moved to her desk, fingers drumming against mahogany. I also pointed out that HR found no policy violations in their investigation, that their demands constituted overreach into my private life, and that forcing an employee to choose between friendship and employment created significant legal liability for wrongful termination and discrimination. And they agreed. 3 of them didn't. They resigned rather than support my position. Preston, plus 2 of his allies who've been questioning my leadership for months. Vivian's smile was sharp enough to cut. The rest decided my value to the company outweighed their discomfort with my choices. Turns out, tripling revenue gives you leverage. What about Preston? Preston tried to call for a leadership vote. I called for an audit of his consultant contracts with the company over the past 4 years. Vivian's voice went cold. Found irregularities that made his vote irrelevant. Overpayments, duplicate billing services never rendered. He'd been skimming for years, hiding behind his grief over Nathaniel to avoid scrutiny. Security walked him out 20 minutes ago. Garrett sank into one of her leather chair's legs, suddenly unreliable. She'd done it. Actually, done it. Faced down the board, called their bluff, forced them to choose between her leadership and their need to control her personal life. So, that's it, we won. We survived. Vivian corrected. Whether we won depends on what comes next. The remaining board is watching. One misstep, one hint of actual impropriety, and they'll have grounds to revisit this decision. We have to be careful. Careful, but not invisible. Careful, but not invisible. Vivian agreed, and something in her posture softened. I'm done hiding, done letting fear and guilt dictate my life. But I'm also pragmatic about the reality we're facing. Garrett stood crossing the office to where she stood, framed by windows and city views, close enough to see the fine lines around her eyes, evidence of 5 years carrying weight no one should have to carry. What does that mean for us? It means we have a friendship that makes both our lives better. It means we're going to protect that friendship. It means anyone who has a problem with it can take it up with my lawyers because I'm not giving this up. Vivian's voice was steady, decided. I'm not giving you up. Not for Preston. Not for the board. Not for anyone who thinks they know better how I should grieve or heal or live. This could still get complicated. It's already complicated. Might as well make it worthwhile. They stood together in the office as Friday afternoon stretched toward evening. 2 people who'd fought for the right to choose connection over isolation, who'd risked everything for Saturday mornings and shared grief and the possibility that healing didn't mean forgetting. I'm still coming to Cooper's game tomorrow. Vivian's voice held quiet determination. If that's still okay with you. More than okay. Saturday arrived with gray skies threatening rain. Garrett almost texted Vivian to cancel to suggest they take a break until things cooled down at the office. But Cooper was already dressed in his uniform, bouncing with excitement about the game and asking if Miss Vivian was coming. I think so, buddy. Good. I want to show her my new move. Coach taught me how to do a fake-out. They drove to the field, and Garrett's heart lifted when he saw Vivian already in the bleachers, same spot as always, wearing jeans and a rain jacket and looking determinedly normal despite everything. Some parents were staring. A few had probably seen her in business magazines, recognized the Ice Queen of Seattle slumming it at youth soccer. But Vivian didn't hide. She waved when she saw them, smiled at Cooper, made space for Garrett on the bench beside her. You came, Garrett said, sitting down. Of course I came. I said I would. After this week, I thought maybe this week doesn't change anything. Vivian's voice was firm. Preston doesn't change anything. The board was clear my personal life is my own as long as it doesn't affect my performance. And my performance is stellar. So here I am. People are going to talk. Let them talk. I'm done letting fear of judgment dictate how I live. She turned to him, and her eyes were fierce behind her sunglasses. I spent 5 years frozen in grief because I thought moving forward meant betraying Nathaniel and Hazel. I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not letting anyone, not Preston, not the board, not random gossip, steal what little peace I've found. The game started, and Cooper played with his usual enthusiastic chaos. During halftime, he ran to the bleachers demanding high fives and validation, and Vivian gave him both with genuine warmth that made Garrett's chest ache. Your fake-out needs work, Vivian told Cooper seriously. But your enthusiasm is excellent. That's what Coach says. Enthusiasm counts for a lot. Cooper grinned at her. Are you staying for the park after? If that's okay with you and your dad. Super okay, I want to show you the monkey bars. I can do the whole thing now without falling. After the game, another loss that nobody cared about, they went to the park. Garrett and Vivian sat on their usual bench while Cooper demonstrated his newfound monkey bar prowess with other kids from the team. Normal Saturday morning, normal routine, the kind of ordinary that felt like victory after the week they'd survived. This is the part I missed most, Vivian said quietly. Just existing. Watching life happen without having to control it or fix it or turn it into a quarterly report. Just being present. It's harder than it looks, Garrett admitted. Being present. My mind keeps trying to solve problems that can't be solved, keeps trying to figure out how to be enough for Cooper when I feel like half a person. You're more than enough. Anyone can see that. Can they? Because most days I feel like I'm barely keeping it together. Like one more crisis will shatter whatever fragile stability I've built. Vivian reached over and took his hand, and Garrett realized they were being visible now in public where anyone could see, where parents from Cooper's team might notice and wonder and gossip. But Vivian didn't let go. Then we shatter together, she said simply. And we help each other pick up the pieces. That's what this is, isn't it? Two people learning they don't have to survive alone. Garrett looked at their joined hands at Cooper, laughing on the monkey bars at the gray sky that hadn't yet decided whether to rain. Looked at the pieces of a life he was slowly, painfully rebuilding, with the help of someone who understood that rebuilding didn't mean forgetting. Yeah, he said, that's exactly what this is. 3 weeks later, Saturday mornings had become routine. Vivian showed up at 9, sat with Garrett through Cooper's games, stayed for the park afterward. They grabbed coffee while Cooper played, talking about everything and nothing. Work stress and parenting challenges and the 1,000 small ways grief ambushed you when you least expected it. At the office, nothing changed. Vivian remained the untouchable CEO. Garrett stayed invisible in Cube 7B. They passed each other in hallways without acknowledgement, maintained perfect professional distance. But at night, after Cooper slept, texts would arrive. Small kindnesses wrapped in words. Board meeting went well today. Turns out standing your ground earns respect even from people who wanted you to fold. Cooper asked if you could come to dinner Wednesday. Something about showing you his new space book. No pressure if you're busy. Found myself laughing today. Really laughing, not the performance kind. First time in so long I'd forgotten what it felt like. Made pasta tonight. Only slightly burned. Cooper says it builds character. Small steps, careful progress. Two people learning to trust each other with their fractures while building something new from the wreckage of their losses. Wednesday dinner happened with Cooper as enthusiastic host, showing Vivian his spacebook collection and explaining black holes with 7-year-old confidence that the universe made perfect sense if you just paid attention. Garrett watched them interact, Vivian asking genuine questions, Cooper answering with earnest authority, and felt something shift in his chest that might have been hope. After Cooper went to bed, Vivian lingered in the living room, not quite ready to leave. "Thank you for having me." She looked around the small apartment that had become familiar over weeks of visits. "For letting me be part of this, part of your life with Cooper. Thank you for wanting to be part of it." Vivian moved to the window, looking out at Seattle's nighttime glow. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond." Garrett's stomach dropped. This was it, the moment she'd realized this was too complicated, too risky, too much. The moment she'd choose safety over connection. "Okay. When I met you that night in my office, I was planning to dance until I couldn't feel anything anymore. Until the grief consumed me completely, or I found some way to numb it." Vivian's voice was steady, but Garrett heard the tremor underneath. "I wasn't expecting someone to follow the sound. Wasn't expecting connection." She turned to face him. "These past weeks, the Saturday mornings and the friendship and Cooper's wisdom, it's been the best part of my life since the crash. The only part that feels real instead of performed." Garrett waited, sensing there was more. But somewhere along the way it stopped being just friendship. Vivian's voice dropped lower. Stopped being just shared grief and mutual understanding. And I don't know what to do with that. Don't know if I'm allowed to feel more when Nathaniel and Hazel are gone. Don't know if you're ready for more when Claire's pictures are still on your walls and her memory is still in every room. Garrett's heart was hammering so hard he thought she must hear it. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I have feelings for you that go beyond friendship. Feelings that terrify me because they feel like betrayal and hope and grief and possibility all tangled together." She finally looked at him directly. "And I needed you to know, even if it ruins everything. Even if you can't feel the same way because you're not ready or don't want complications or—" Garrett kissed her. It wasn't planned, wasn't smooth, wasn't anything except raw and honest and necessary. He kissed her and felt 5 years of her loneliness meet his 18 months of survival. Felt grief and hope crash together in a way that hurt and healed simultaneously. When they broke apart, both were crying. "I'm terrified," Garrett whispered. "Terrified of losing someone again. Terrified of Cooper getting attached and then you leaving. Terrified that feeling this way about you means I'm erasing Claire." "You're not erasing her." Vivian touched his face gently. "You're making room for something new alongside something eternal. Claire will always be Cooper's mother. Nathaniel and Hazel will always be my first family. But maybe we're allowed to build something new without destroying what we had. I don't know how to do this. Don't know how to be with someone when I'm still so broken. Then we figure it out together." Vivian's voice held determination. "We take it slow. We let Cooper set the pace. We honor the people we lost while choosing to live for the people we still have." Garrett thought about Claire, about the last words she'd said before dying without warning. About 18 months of surviving instead of living. Thought about Cooper asking why Vivian never came inside about his son's wisdom that brave meant trying even when you were scared. "Okay," he said, "but we do this right. Slow with Cooper's well-being as the priority. And the second it becomes too much, the second either of us isn't ready, we stop and reassess. No pressure, no expectations." Vivian took his hand. Just two people learning to live again. Together this time. They sat on the couch talking until midnight about what this meant, what it could look like, how to navigate feelings neither had expected to have again. And when Vivian finally left, she kissed him goodbye at the door like it was both the most natural and most terrifying thing in the world. Garrett stood in his apartment afterwards staring at Claire's picture and said out loud, "I hope this is okay. I hope you'd understand. I hope you know I'll never stop loving you, even if I'm learning to love someone else too." The picture didn't answer, but somehow the silence felt less heavy than before. Telling Cooper required strategy and honesty and the kind of conversation Garrett had never imagined having with a 7-year-old. He waited until Sunday morning over pancakes when his son was alert but relaxed. "Can we talk about something important, buddy?" Cooper looked up from his chocolate chips. "Is this about Miss Vivian? How did you Dad, you smile different now, and you check your phone more. And yesterday when she left, you watched her car until it disappeared." Cooper grinned with the satisfaction of a detective solving a case. "I'm 7, not dumb." Garrett almost laughed. "Okay. Yeah, it's about Vivian. How would you feel if if we tried being more than friends? Like dating. Yeah, like dating." Cooper was quiet for a long moment, pushing pancake pieces around his plate. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. "Will she try to be my new mom?" Garrett's heart broke. "Nobody, no one will ever be your mom. Mom is mom, always. Vivian has her own daughter she lost, and she's not trying to replace Hazel any more than she'd try to replace your mom. But she could be someone who cares about you, who's part of our lives in a different way. What if she leaves like Mom did?" Cooper's voice cracked. "What if I like her, and then she dies too?" And there it was. The fear Garrett felt every single day spoken with the clarity only children possess. The terror that love meant loss, that letting someone in meant risking another devastating goodbye. "I can't promise she won't leave," Garrett said honestly, reaching across the table to squeeze his son's hand. "I can't promise any of us won't get hurt or lose each other, because that's the risk of loving people. But I can promise that running away from caring about someone because we're scared doesn't actually protect us. It just makes us lonely." Cooper thought about this face serious. "Mrs. Brennan says being brave isn't not being scared. It's being scared and trying anyway. Mrs. Brennan is very wise. So if you're scared but trying anyway, that's brave." "Yeah, buddy, that's exactly what brave is." Cooper nodded slowly. "Okay, you can date Miss Vivian, but you have to promise something." "What's that?" "If you're going to love her, you have to love her for real. Not halfway, not scared love. Real love like you loved Mom." Cooper's eyes were fierce with 7-year-old conviction. "Because Miss Vivian is sad like us, and she deserves someone who's brave enough to love her all the way." Garrett pulled his son into a hug that lasted well past 12 seconds, holding on while tears ran down his face. When did Cooper get so smart? When did his little boy become wise enough to understand that real love required courage, that half measures were worse than nothing? "When did you get so smart? I was always smart." Cooper's voice was muffled against Garrett's shoulder. "You just don't listen when you're in your head too much." The first official dinner with all three of them happened the following Wednesday, and Garrett had never been more nervous about cooking spaghetti in his life. Cooper set the table with elaborate care, folding napkins into shapes that were supposed to be swans but looked more like confused triangles. When Vivian arrived carrying flowers and looking more nervous than she'd ever looked in a boardroom, Cooper greeted her at the door with ceremonial gravity. "Welcome to our home. Dad's making spaghetti because that's all he knows how to make without burning things. I made swan napkins, but they look weird, and we have a rule about dinner." "What's the rule?" Vivian asked, playing along. "Everyone has to say one good thing about their day and one thing they're grateful for. It's how we remember to notice good stuff, even when things are hard." Cooper took her hand and led her inside. "Also, if you don't like the spaghetti, you have to lie and say it's good because Dad's feelings get hurt." "I heard that," Garrett called from the kitchen. "You were supposed to." Cooper grinned at Vivian. "Come see my room. I want to show you my new space posters." Garrett watched them disappear down the hallway, heard Cooper's enthusiastic explanation of constellations and black holes, heard Vivian's genuine interest and questions. Something in his chest loosened the fear that this would be awkward or forced or wrong. Instead, it felt like pieces fitting together in a way he hadn't expected but desperately needed. Dinner was chaotic and imperfect and exactly right. Cooper dominated conversation with elaborate theories about whether dinosaurs could survive in space. Vivian contributed actual scientific knowledge that both impressed and disappointed him when she explained why T-Rex couldn't actually drive a spaceship, and Garrett just watched them interact with something that felt dangerously close to hope. During dessert ice cream, because Garrett's baking skills were non-existent, Cooper executed his gratitude rule with the seriousness of a judge. "Dad, you go first." "Okay. My good thing today was this dinner. My grateful thing is that you two are willing to take a chance on building something new together." "Miss Vivian's turn." Vivian set down her spoon carefully. "My good thing was being invited into your home, into your family space. My grateful thing is that you're letting me try to be part of your lives even though I don't know if I'm doing it right." "You're doing it right," Cooper said with confidence. "Now my turn. My good thing was showing you my space posters. My grateful thing is that Dad's learning to be brave even when he's scared and that you make him smile like Mom used to." The air went still. Garrett felt tears prick his eyes, saw Vivian's hand cover her mouth. Cooper looked between them, worried. "Did I say something wrong?" "No, buddy." Garrett's voice was rough. "You said something very, very right." After dinner, Cooper requested a story with all the voices, which meant Garrett had to perform an elaborate space adventure featuring dinosaurs, astronauts, and a dragon who was afraid of heights. Vivian sat on the floor next to Cooper's bed, listening with delight as Garrett made a fool of himself with sound effects and character voices. When Cooper finally drifted off mid-story, they tiptoed out together like co-conspirators. In the living room, Vivian said quietly, "Thank you for letting me be part of Thank you for wanting to be part of it." Garrett pulled her close, and this time there was no hesitation, no careful distance, just two people choosing to hold each other while standing in a room filled with another woman's pictures and another family's memories. Choosing to believe that life continued even after loss, that love expanded to include both the dead and the living. "Is this weird?" Vivian looked at the photos on the walls. Claire, smiling Cooper, growing evidence of a family that had been. Being here with her watching. "A little," Garrett admitted, "but also not. I spent 5 years keeping Nathaniel and Hazel's rooms exactly as they left them, preserved like museums to people who aren't coming back. Maybe what we're doing is healthier, keeping their memories alive while making space for new life." "Is that what we're doing? Making new life?" "I hope so. The next 3 months were a study in building something new while honoring what had been lost." Vivian started joining them for dinners twice a week, her presence becoming familiar enough that Cooper would set the table for three without being asked. She learned Garrett's routines with Cooper, the 12-second morning hugs, the space books before bed, the way certain days were harder than others for reasons that didn't need explanation. Garrett learned Vivian's patterns too, the way she needed silence after difficult board meetings, how she avoided the anniversary dates of the crash, the fact that she sometimes woke from nightmares about plane engines and couldn't go back to sleep. He learned to hold her through the darkness without demanding she explain. Learned that sometimes grief needed witnessing more than solving. They were careful at work maintaining professional distance in public, while texting throughout the day, like teenagers discovering connection for the first time. Jennifer noticed and smiled knowingly, but said nothing. The board had made their position clear. Vivian's personal life was her own as long as performance remained stellar. And performance was better than ever. The real challenge came 4 months in when Vivian asked the question Garrett had been dreading. "Can I see where Hazel and Nathaniel lived?" They were at her house for the first time, a massive place in an expensive neighborhood that felt more like a museum than a home. Everything perfectly preserved, untouched, waiting for people who would never return. Hazel's bedroom had princess curtains and a bookshelf full of stories. Nathaniel's office had aviation magazines and framed photos from the flight school where he'd learned to pilot small planes. The air felt heavy with absence, thick with 5 years of refusing to let go. Garrett stood in the doorway of Hazel's room and felt the weight of Vivian's grief like a physical presence. 5 years of preservation. 5 years of treating death like a temporary absence instead of a permanent reality. "I can't change them," Vivian whispered. "Can't move anything, or donate anything, or acknowledge that they're really gone. It feels like betraying them." "It feels like the only way to keep them," Garrett said, gently understanding, because he'd done the same thing. Kept Claire's clothes in the closet for months because removing them felt like erasing her. "But Vivian, they're not in these rooms. They're in your memory, in your heart, in the way you live your life. Keeping their space frozen doesn't bring them back." "I know. Logically, I know." Her voice broke. "But emotionally, if I box up Hazel's toys or clear out Nathaniel's office, what's left? How do I prove they existed?" Garrett thought about his apartment with Claire's pictures everywhere, about how he'd initially kept everything exactly as it was because change felt like betrayal, about how Cooper had finally asked 6 months after the funeral if maybe they could donate Mom's things to people who needed them because Mom always said helping others was important. "You prove they existed by living the life they'd want you to live," Garrett said. "By being the person they fell in love with, the mother Hazel knew the wife Nathaniel chose. By making space for new memories while honoring old ones." Vivian sank onto Hazel's bed, surrounded by stuffed animals and princess dresses. "I don't know how to do that." "Then let me help. Let us help me and Cooper. We'll go through it together." Keep what matters, donate what someone else could use. Create space that honors them without imprisoning you. No pressure, no judgment, just choosing to live in a present that acknowledges the past instead of a past that denies the present. It took 2 weekends to sort through Hazel's room with Cooper helping because he understood what it meant to love someone who was gone. They kept the special stuffed animals and favorite books, the handmade drawings and photos that captured Hazel's spirit. They donated clothes to a children's shelter, toys to a hospital, princess decorations to a foster care organization. Nathaniel's office took longer because Vivian kept finding reminders, love notes tucked in books, photos from trips they'd taken, evidence of a life fully lived before it ended too soon. But slowly, carefully, they created space that honored without suffocating, that remembered without requiring perfection. When they finished, Vivian stood in the transformed rooms and cried. But this time the tears felt different, less like drowning, more like release. "Thank you," she whispered to Garrett, "for not letting me stay frozen. Thank you for trusting me to help you thaw." The shift happened gradually after that. Vivian stopped treating her house like a museum and started living in it. She invited Garrett and Cooper over for dinners, let Cooper's energy fill the empty spaces, laughed without guilt when something was funny. She kept photos of Nathaniel and Hazel displayed with love, but stopped shrinking herself to fit into the person she'd been when they were alive. One Saturday morning, 6 months after that first midnight encounter, Vivian arrived at the soccer field carrying something wrapped in tissue paper. "What's that?" Cooper asked, abandoning his warm-up to investigate. "A gift for both of you. Open it after the game." Cooper vibrated with curiosity through the entire match, which his team actually won, sending all the 7-year-olds into ecstatic celebration. Afterwards, sitting on their usual bench while kids swarmed the playground, Cooper carefully unwrapped the tissue paper to reveal 2 framed photos. One showed Vivian, Nathaniel, and Hazel at the beach, all 3 smiling at the camera with ocean and sunset behind them, evidence of joy before tragedy. The other showed Garrett, Claire, and baby Cooper in the hospital, Claire holding their newborn son with exhausted joy, while Garrett looked at both of them like they were miracles. "I thought maybe we could have these in our home," Vivian said carefully. "Wherever that is. So both our families are present, both our histories are honored, both our pasts are part of our future." Cooper looked at the photos, then at Garrett with a question in his eyes. Garrett felt his throat close around words that wouldn't come. Our home. She'd said our home like it was a given, like the 3 of them were building something together that deserved to be called a family. "Can we?" Cooper asked. "Can Miss Vivian live with us? My place is too small for 3 people, buddy." Then we moved to her place. "It's huge. I could have my own room and space for all my posters." Cooper caught himself. "But only if you want to, Dad. Only if you're ready." Garrett looked at his son, hopeful, healing, ready to expand their broken family into something new. Looked at Vivian, vulnerable, offering her home and her heart. Looked at the photos representing 2 families that had been whole and were now fractured, but maybe, just maybe, could form something new without erasing what had been. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I think I'm ready." The logistics took time, selling his lease, moving their modest belongings into Vivian's large house, figuring out rhythms and routines in a space that held memories for all of them. Cooper claimed Hazel's former room with reverence, carefully arranging his space posters next to the few princess decorations they'd kept. Garrett moved his and Claire's photos to the master bedroom, placing them on the dresser where he could see them every morning and remember. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, they built a life that honored everyone they'd lost while celebrating everyone they'd found. 6 months after moving in on a Tuesday evening that felt like any other, Cooper asked Vivian the question that changed everything. "Miss Vivian, can I ask you something?" They were setting the table together. A routine that had become comfortable, natural. Vivian looked at Cooper with the attention she gave to board presentations. "Of course. I know you're not my real mom, and you'll never be. Mom is mom forever." Cooper's voice was careful, like he was testing ice to see if it would hold. "But maybe you could be my bonus mom, like the mom who came second, the one who stays." Vivian's eyes filled with tears. She knelt down to Cooper's level hands on his shoulders. "I would be honored to be your bonus mom." Cooper threw his arms around her neck, and Vivian held him while crying into his shoulder. Garrett watched from the doorway, feeling his own tears fall, thinking about second chances and bonus families and the way love expanded to fill whatever space you gave it. That night after Cooper was asleep, Garrett found Vivian in the kitchen staring at the photos they'd hung on the wall, Claire and Nathaniel and Hazel, alongside new pictures of the 3 of them together. Evidence that both families existed, that love didn't replace love, but added to it. "You okay?" He came up behind her, arms wrapping around her waist. "Better than okay." Vivian leaned back against him. Cooper called me his bonus mom today. I heard. What did you tell him? That I'd be honored. That Hazel would always be my daughter and Claire would always be his mom, but maybe there's room in a heart for more than one person to love. Garrett turned her around to face him. I love you. I love you and I love Claire, and those two things don't cancel each other out. They coexist. Is that okay? It's more than okay. Vivian's voice held certainty. Because I love you, and I love Nathaniel and Hazel, and we're all just doing the best we can with the pieces we have left. They stood together in the kitchen of a house that had been full of ghosts and was now full of life. Outside, Seattle glittered in the darkness, indifferent to the small human triumphs playing out in its towers and neighborhoods. But inside this house, 3 people who'd survived the worst were choosing to build something from the wreckage. 1 year after that first midnight discovery, Garrett and Vivian returned to the place where it started. He'd snuck into Marlowe Corporate Solutions after hours easier now that he carried Vivian's access codes and found her finishing late work. Come with me. Where, you'll see. He led her to the conference room on the 8th floor, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He'd set his phone to play the same melancholy music she'd been humming that first night, the song she'd danced to while crying and alone and falling apart. What is this? Vivian asked. A reminder of where we started. Garrett extended his hand. You were dancing alone. I asked to join you. Everything changed. Dance with me now, not because we're broken, not because we're grieving, but because we're alive and we're together, and we're choosing this. Vivian took his hand and they moved in slow circles to music only they understood. But this time there were no tears, no ghosts, no desperate attempts to feel something other than pain. This time there was just 2 people who'd survived the worst and chosen to build something from the wreckage. I love you, Garrett said quietly. I love you, and I love Claire, and those 2 things coexist. I love you. Vivian looked up at him. I love you, and I love Nathaniel and Hazel. We're doing the best we can with the pieces we have left. They danced until the music ended, until the night grew late, until it was time to return home to Cooper and Mrs. Brennan, and a life that was messy and complicated and absolutely worth fighting for. They'd started as 2 broken people in darkness finding each other through shared pain and desperate loneliness. But they'd become something more, a family forged from loss and choice, from Saturday mornings and midnight confessions, from the courage to love again when love had already taken everything. Garrett thought about Claire as he drove home that night, about whether she'd approve of what he'd built from the ashes of their life together. Thought about Nathaniel and Hazel, about whether they'd be happy their wife and mother had found a way to live again. Thought about the impossibility of moving forward while honoring the past, and how maybe that impossibility was the only way forward. When he arrived home, Cooper was still awake despite the late hour, sitting on the couch with Vivian while she read him the spacebook using all the voices. His son looked up when Garrett entered and smiled with Claire's smile. Dad. We're at the part about black holes. Miss Vivian says they're not really holes, they're more like gravitational wells, where escape velocity exceeds the speed of light. Garrett finished joining them on the couch. Exactly. Cooper snuggled between them. Mrs. Brennan says our family is like reverse black holes. Instead of sucking everything in until it disappears, we pull people into orbit and make them part of our gravity. Vivian laughed. Mrs. Brennan has very creative physics theories. She's right, though, Garrett said quietly. We pull people in. We make them part of our gravity. We choose love even when it's terrifying. He looked at the 2 people flanking him, his son who'd inherited his mother's wisdom and resilience, the woman who'd learned to live again through sheer force of will and Saturday mornings. Looked at the photos on the walls showing families that had been and families that were becoming. looked at the evidence that life continued even after loss, that love expanded to include both the dead and the living. And Garrett Sullivan, widower and single father and mid-level analyst who'd followed the sound of grief one midnight and found something worth surviving for, finally understood what it meant to be whole again. Not healed. Healing would take a lifetime, would involve setbacks and hard days and moments when the past threatened to consume the present. But whole in the sense that mattered, surrounded by love, choosing life, honoring the dead by refusing to stop living, by dancing when someone asked, by taking chances on connection, by being brave enough to love again, even when love meant risk. Cooper yawned. Can we finish the chapter? Of course. Vivian resumed the story, and Garrett listened to her read with all the voices heard. His son's delighted laughter felt the weight of chosen family and second chances and imperfect but beautiful new beginnings. He thought about that first night, about the broken CEO dancing alone in her office, about his own loneliness echoing hers across the empty building. They'd found each other in darkness. They'd built something in the light. And all of that, every risk taken, every boundary crossed, every moment of vulnerability and courage, all of it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.